Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, great. Stop interrupting me. I'm kidding. All right. So yeah, last time we kind of talked about what the metagame meant for each of us, and it's a concept that is evolving in people's heads organically. People have different conceptions of what it is. One of the founder of the store, Peter, he talks about coming into right relationship with the ecology of games that we're currently playing. And I really like that concept of right relationship. I think it's at the core of what we're getting at here. And so I guess I would like to build on that. And so I conceive of the metagame as knowing which tools to use, how and when to use them, and knowing how and when to put them down. And I think this last part is fundamental to right relationship. We talked about, this is something we also talked about. Anybody you heard of this book by this gentleman, Eric Fromm? Hands in the chat, anybody? No, okay, yeah, David. Okay.
I've Escape from Freedom, but.
Oh, okay, yeah. This one is, I think, is might be more popular than that one, but Escape from Freedom is popular too. So we just went through, anybody want to give a recap of what, I guess, this book is about and what we talked about? Anybody? Just, anybody? Great. 1 second.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I don't want to recap it, but I just felt it was sort of a complicated way of talking about being self-centered or being compassionate.
Sorry?
I thought it was simply the dichotomy between being self-centered or being compassionate. It would be more simple to put it that way.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and another thing that a lot of people brought up is that it's not so much the particular thing that's being done, but the intention behind it. And that's kind of related to the having the right relationship to it. It's about choosing instead of allowing something to choose for you. So yeah, we talked about that a lot. We showed examples of where it shows up in different situations, different books. People have talked about these things throughout time, and religions kind of call ideology when you're operating in the having mode. So sorry, for some people who weren't here, I guess generally speaking, the having mode is a way. Eric Fromm talks about a way of being in the world where you're acting from an acquisitive. Existential mode. So this is why I use this cluster of words here to kind of give you a sense of what the having mode is. So possessing, consuming, idolizing, these things are a kind of way to have a kind of wrong relationship with certain stimuli in the world and certain objects in the world. And it's more reactive than responsive. It's less of having a choice and being chosen for. So he talks about how, the advertising industry encourages to confuse these two modes. So they try to convince you that in order to express your creativity, you need certain things. You need to have certain status symbols, certain products, and etc. And this kind of modal confusion that is kind of prevalent in a consumer society. So it's something that we have to contend with almost every day. So yeah, we talked about specific examples, in different texts and different traditions. So then we had a breakout session. This is one of my best friends. He always used to advocate having creative desires over possessive desires. I thought that was very related. And we had a breakout session talking about our own possessive desires, our own creative desires, and how they're related. And I think this is where we stopped. This is where we left off. So I'm going to continue this process, and then we'll have a couple more breakout sessions and hopefully we'll get to the end this time. So yeah, anybody is familiar with extended cognition, or the concept of extended cognition? No, not really. So extended cognition is just the idea is that we think through or with tools. So we use thinking tools, whether it's physical technologies, social technologies, or psychotechnologies, and those things are kind of like amorphous sets that sometimes things overlap in them. But the idea is that we don't really think purely. We think through different things. We think through a language. We think through different concepts. We think through institutions, and even think through like physical objects. They form our ontology, our apparatus for interacting with the world. So they kind of if you study like media theory, you'll hear people talking about how these tools that we use, they kind of redraw the boundary of the self, right? So any questions? Any questions?
I have a comment. I just remember hearing something from a cognitive scientist about how when you hold a screwdriver, your brain models the length of your arm as to the tip of the screwdriver.
Yeah.
So we're just like naturally geared to extending the boundaries of the self.
Exactly. Yeah. This is precisely what I was getting at, and I guess you'll see further what how my thinking of how this develops, and yeah, that's precisely what I was trying to get at here. So yeah, so this can be a problem. This is what confusion is. You know, John Verbighi talks about confusion being fused with, and here are some examples of some tweets in my feed of, I think, a certain type of confusion that happens unconsciously. It's without choice, and you kind of fuse yourself with the tools that you're using. So if you guys could read the first one, it says, I've opted into a pretty strict community structure and schedule where my time to engage with the tech is significantly reduced. I feel like part of my brain has been cut off, like I've been lobotomized, really struggling to get back to analog when I was 90% digital. Tips to adapt. So basically the idea is that this person, through usage of these tools, of this medium, kind of got fused with it, got confused with it, and the person felt like they lost part of themselves. When you hear people say, I can't live without this thing, it's a kind of accumulation of attachments that happens naturally. And a problem with this is that when these attachments get attacked, we feel like we ourselves are being attacked because we redrew our boundary around that thing. So whether it's like an ideology, or like for the second example, you can see, you know, it says, I can live without the NBA or the MLB, but I can't live without the NFL. So the person arbitrarily drew the boundary of themselves around the NFL. And when that gets threatened, they feel threatened. And you can extrapolate this to political ideologies, or even things in your objects in your life, like a car or something like that. So you guys are familiar with this experiment where, just show of hands, people are familiar with this experiment. It's pretty famous, yeah. Anybody want to give a shot at explaining it? I think I want to encourage you guys to help me out here. Oh, everyone who raised their hand, I want one person to try to give a.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's like, so when he hits the fake arm, he'll react as if it's an internal experience. He'll react as if that's actually hurting him, because I guess the boundary, like his mind sees that fake hand as his real hand, and kind of reminds me of like, you know, like when people don't have, like, get their arm chopped off or something, they still have those phantom sensations or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's precisely it. And prior to that experience of feeling like your arm has been attacked, they kind of stimulated you have experienced stimulation with it. So it's like the more you mediate yourself through an object, or perceive to be mediating yourself through an object, the more you get attached to it. Kind of like naturally our brain kind of does that. So yeah, that's a really good. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you. I won't play the video because you guys, Matthew did such a good job of explaining it.
Well, does he freak out?
Oh yeah, he does. He does.
Okay, you don't have to. I'm just curious.
Oh, okay, okay.
I guess.
But you can check it out. But yeah, he kind of feels like only that arm pulls back. He feels like his arm is being attacked, and yeah. And it's a very repeatable experiment. It doesn't work all the time, but you might want to try it out with your friend maybe. Okay. All right, so we're going to do a breakout session. I want to know, you guys might want to talk about like how have you experienced this kind of confusion, fused with something unintentionally, you lose something and all of a sudden you feel like you lost your world. And maybe about how you navigate this problem. And maybe we can break out for about 5 minutes around this, and you guys could come back and share what you guys talked about. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second here so I can split you guys up. Breakout. Maybe I'll do three people each room. So yeah, we got some new people who just entered, Andre and Manas, who just showed up while everyone's in the chat, the breakout rooms. Yeah, anybody want to share what you talked about? If no one.
I can share.
Okay.
We had an interesting chat about instruments and relationships. And actually, Yuli, if you want to share, I really like the way you described your piece. I can say it too if you don't want to share, but I'd like to hear from you.
Sure, I can share. I was talking about the last breakup that I had with my boyfriend, my then boyfriend. And I was remembering our last night together as a couple and the following night when I was at my new place by myself. And I could feel like, a part of myself was like shutting down, kind of like a computer is shutting down. And then the first night at my new place, I could feel that I'm rebooting with different elements of myself. And there were certain applications that weren't there, certain parts of my identity that wasn't there, that I had to rebuild.
That's extremely interesting, that analogy with the applications, that's very salient to me right now. Yeah, and I think as we go on with the presentation, it'll become more obvious why. But yeah, that's really interesting. Even that you had the kind of awareness to perceive that happening in yourself. It's really interesting. Anybody else want to share? Oh, Ron.
Just one fundamental maybe thing we came up with, and shout out to Matthew for this, is that this is mostly an unconscious process that obviously we could maybe consciously, or when we're smart, to say, yeah, the screwdriver is not part of my arm, but the idea is that at some level your unconscious is making it. And it could be the same with lots of stuff. So it's not even knowing that we're identifying or making part of ourselves, computers, phones. Again, shout out to Matthew, used a good example of driving a car, and we all know how our unconscious can drive the car while we're not paying attention in a sense. So it makes it a trickier thing if we don't even know these processes were fused, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess maybe we'll get to this later on too, but I guess that's why we kind of developed different rituals to kind of shut down those apps that we don't realize are running in the background. Yeah, that's really good share. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, with the car analogy, it just struck me that I've had experiences with where someone else was driving my car and I was in the passenger seat, and it was very uncomfortable. The car was not stopping as quickly as I would make it stop. It was because the person was not driving exactly the way that I would drive my car, and it felt very uncomfortable because the car is normally a part of me.
Wow, that's a really interesting anecdote that I never had a car, so I didn't experience it, but yeah, wow, that's a really interesting anecdote. It's almost like you feel like someone commandeered part of your system. Yeah. Interesting. Oh, Paul, you want to say something? Paul, you're on mute, Paul. I'll unmute you.
Okay, I had the space bar down, but it didn't work. There should be one day when I pass from electronics, from the phone and the computer, like the Sabbath, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, that would really, you know, be spiritual.
Yeah. The Sabbath is one of the examples of people attempting to kind of put their tools down and remembering the kingdom to come, you know, being mode, the supreme being mode. Yes, exactly. Okay, so I will continue the presentation unless anyone else would like to share. Okay.
I just want to say on the topic of the car, I've had that dream symbology happen to me a lot of the time, so it's not uncommon at all. Yeah, I think it's symbolic of a lack of control.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, let's see where to leave off. Yeah, so can you guys see my screen?
Sure can.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so great. Thank you. So yeah, I just want to bring up, so now we're getting on to the topic of, you know, what can be done about it. And this is something I want you guys to help me figure out, and I want to hear your feedback. But if how many of you guys are familiar with John Vervaeke and his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series? So a couple people. Okay, so in episode 9, he talks about the distinction between meditation. Sorry, yeah, episode 9, he talks about a distinction between meditation and contemplation. So he suggests that all of the ways through which we try to apprehend reality, apprehend the world, can fall on this kind of these two axes. And one is the opacity transparency axis, and one is the Gestalt features axis. So stick with me here. I'll try to tie this back in. So the Gestalt features axis is pretty much like if you considered pointillism, the style of painting pointillism, you realize that if you zoom into the picture, you get a sense of what the features are. Each thing is a point on its own. But then if you step back, you get the bigger picture, and you see houses and other forms emerge. So this shift from features to Gestalt is one of the dimensions that we kind of move through the world with. And the other one is opacity transparency. It's the difference between looking at and looking through, or apprehending and apprehending through. So if something is opaque to you, you're looking at it, or you're interacting with it directly. Your cognition's interacting with it directly. But if it's transparent to you, you're looking through it, and sometimes you forget that you have it on, like your glasses is a perfect example, or an ideology. You could be looking at the world through an ideology, but you're not realizing that you're doing that. So that shift is something else, that another axis along which we apprehend the world. So his distinction between contemplation and meditation is that it happens on this kind of diagonal. So meditation is going into the self, looking at the features, making them more opaque to you. So you focus on sensations, you focus on different parts of your sensations, and you're kind of going back into yourself to make those things about yourself opaque. And contemplation, he says, is the opposite of that, in the direction of you're reaching out into the world for meaning, and you're looking at the bigger picture, and you going deeper and deeper into reality through different media. And I really like this distinction, and I encourage you to look at the episode 9 of his Awakening from Meaning Crisis. I think it's a really useful way to look at it, and I hope we can talk about it some more. Well, one of the questions we had in the breakout session was, what do you do about this proclivity to kind of accumulate attachments, accumulate things? And I think I want to introduce this term called ontological breathing. So the idea is kind of straightforward. I think you might have guessed it by now. It's just oscillating between contemplation and meditation, and so that you don't have apps running inefficiently in the background. So the idea is that you put your tools down through meditation, you observe your biases and your tools that you're using, your attachments, you contemplate, you meditate on your attachments, and you kind of put them down, you make a decision to put them down, and that affords you the resources to then reach the contemplative heights that give your life a sense of meaning, a deeper meaning, give you the skills of apprehending reality with high fidelity. So you hear people from religious backgrounds to scientists talking about reaching transcendental heights through the contemplation. Einstein or Eric Weinstein or the church fathers many centuries ago. So the idea is that the inspiration is, using the analogy of breathing, inspiration is you inspired from the world, so you go further into reality. Exploration of self is you kind of getting rid of you dropping the applets that are running on in the background, you're dropping the attachments, and you're expiring that. And so yeah, if you look at the self-will nexus, it's almost like you're gathering resources to kind of to apply them to apprehending reality in a more effectual way. So yeah, the bottom section is just what I think we tend to be most often. We kind of just have these random attachments that we're not sure of, we're not aware of, whether it's different ideologies, different ideas, different models in which we, or narratives, stories we tell ourselves. I think paying attention to the stories that you're telling yourself and who you think you are in that story, I think that's really important. So this is one way I've come to think about how to maintain the kind of healthy, because we kind of have to use tools, right? We obviously have to use tools. So kind of ritualizing, putting them down so that we could pick them back up again in a more effectual way. It's almost like trying to play tennis if you're having spatula, like a frying pan in your hand. You have to put them down to pick up the tennis racket so that you can play properly. But I want to know if this conceptualization is useful or makes sense to anybody, or any tips on how I can think about this in a better way, or if anybody's heard a better way of thinking about this. We'll have more breakout sessions, but yeah.
I have one. So
Yeah.
if this is ontological breathing, when you refer to tools, what are you referring to? Because tools and equipment have a very definitive purpose within ontology.
Okay, so maybe you could talk about that more. What do you mean by that?
So within phenomenology and in ontology and the works of Heidegger, equipment and tools are things and objects we interact with, and their purpose depends on their handiness and they're ready, if they're ready for hand or if they are just present at hand. And that defines whether they are just simply an object like dirt, or if they're a tool like a phone or like a hammer or similar. So if we just sort of think about like our phones, our computer, a book, that's a tool in one sense, so it's like equipment. But if we're thinking in this other sense, there are a lot of other things we have to sort of disconnect from and get rid of our attachment from before we can get into the ontological mindset. That's what I think.
So I guess, how, anybody else want to chime in on that? I guess the way I look at it is
I don't agree with your definition. I think contemplation is one of these concepts. You can contemplate yourself. Isn't that the average?
I wasn't disagreeing with that.
Oh, no. I think he was disagreeing with mine, not yours, Andre. Okay. No, yeah, that's yeah, okay. Appreciate that feedback. I liked John Vicky's distinction, and it's kind of like all models are kind of wrong. Sometimes they're useful, but yeah, thanks for that feedback.
Sorry, yeah, I also just discussing this and showing this, it brought up ideas from alchemical cognition, I think is the phrasing of, you know, how breaking out of the box, thinking out of the box, using ways of, you know, cognitive approaches that seem counterintuitive. And in that, something that's interesting is that in ritual, even the taking up of tools and the laying down of tools themselves can be rituals and are meaningful themselves, and could themselves be contemplative states or meditative states. So I think that's maybe something interesting to explore, so that it doesn't necessarily become a, not that I think that that's what you were saying, but, you know, just looking at a 2D picture, it almost seems like there's this, you know, let's go up to this state as a goal, let's go, you know, then down again to that state as a goal. But even seeing the process as maybe not as a journey to a destination, but actually as processes themselves, and the transition itself having properties that might be unique to the transition. That, you know, that might be different from, you know, the non-transition state. So yeah.
No, yeah, I totally get it. Yeah, it's like maybe not so much you're looking at these things as like end states, but in particular, but the journey through them, the rituals that shape the journey from one to the other, in itself is an important thing. Yeah, I like that. But yeah, so I just like I guess a simple way to look at this is like, you know, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you want to apprehend the world properly, you kind of have to put the hammer down and maybe pick up some other tools. But anyway, so the idea that you kind of have to kind of learn how to die, you know, that's an old, very old classical philosophical concept. And I just really like this gentleman here, Cornel West. Anyone know Cornel West? Yeah, some people, okay. I love this guy. So, but yeah, basically, you know, he says, you can't talk about truth without talking about learning how to die, because it's precisely about learning how to die, examining yourself and transforming the old self into a better self, that you actually live more intensely and critically and abundantly. So the idea of like killing the self is what I think they mean by putting tools down, or putting the conceptions down, that your attachments down. And you know, we talked about I want to know what you guys think the difference, if there's a difference between contemplation and meditation, if there is just some type of semantics that's not useful. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Maybe we can just, you know, casually chat here. Can you contemplate using embodied cognition, you know, through different modes other than mental abstractions? can you contemplate with your hands? I wanna hear what you guys think about that. You know, you can feel free to unmute yourself.
I think the first thing that came up with this distinction is the Buddhist distinction between like analytical meditation and I guess just meditation. I forget the names, but yeah, it's something like where you use analytical meditation to just sort of contemplate something and then maybe get a sense of that thing as a felt sense, and then you can meditate on that felt sense to kind of like dye your soul with it, so to speak.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So you kind of use kind of both in relation to each other to kind of supplement each other. Yeah. Anybody's ever thought about this distinction before, and if so, how do you make sense of it?
Something that came up for me, Khalil, was maybe a bit of like a metaphor or analogy, is that something like when you're talking about the meditative state, it's almost like creating a space, right? It's about that kind of approaching a state of nothingness, right? Like putting the tools down. So it's more about the space than the thing you use the space in. And then contemplation is that place where the focus is on the thing you use within the space. So both the thing and the space is important because that creates the situation, the context. And it's the relationship between the two that maybe there's kind of like a hidden dimension to it because there's a relationship. I don't know if that makes sense. It's just what came up. I don't know if any of that fits the question.
No, yeah, I kind of, you know, it's interesting, Maz, because what you did with both of your shares is you kind of added a dimensionality to what we're talking about, which is extremely very cool. I like it. But yeah, the relationship itself is like another optimization problem, to use a you know, that it's in itself, it's a challenging thing. Yeah.
I think it can help describe it from a perspective, from a new perspective, right? It can describe the relationship, can be a perspective to describe contemplation from and meditation from as well.
Yeah.
I've got an idea on that definition. So when we meditate, we try and connect to the ethereal plane or sort of another dimension, another things arise mystically, and then we focus on them and let them go. But when we contemplate, we try and grasp onto things that come from the ethereal and then not let them go. We focus on them consciously and examine them, but then we have the choice to let them go if we want.
Yeah.
Wanting to build on top of that, that's a major distinction that I see with contemplation. It seems that you're creating a reality and really holding onto it within your whatever space you're contemplating. And meditation is the opportunity to take that all apart and to take a look at the individual pieces.
Yeah, that's generally in line with my thinking. And I think, as has been brought up here, I think you kind of have to obviously do both, to kind of enrich your life and to do them, maybe to contemplate deeply. You kind of have to learn how to meditate, or maybe it's not that necessary. Maybe some people are just talented and can do it, but I feel like it helps that. It helps out a lot. But anyway, so maybe we'll do a breakout session. I want to source you guys to figure out what, you know, do you engage in any meditative practice, contemplative practice, and are they related for you in any way? I want to hear about your experiences, but I'm going to break you guys out, and maybe you can come back with some juicy stuff for me. Welcome back, people. Excited to hear what you guys talked about. Anybody want to start? share first? I'm gonna call on someone. I'm going to call on Megan. Okay.
I'll share a few. We got to an interesting topic right at the end about the idea of sort of doing activities, simple activities, possibly sort of self-caring activities in a meditative or a contemplative state. So Andre was talking about the idea of sweeping as a Zen meditation practice. And I added to that the idea of doing the dishes as a meditative practice. There was a phase when I was feeling really frustrated that I had to do household tasks and I didn't have enough time to meditate. So, and obviously feeling frustrated at not having enough time to meditate is very counterproductive if you're trying to, you know, cultivate quality meditation. So it was really useful to realize that, you know, it's possible to cultivate that meditative and or contemplative state while doing activities, you know, walking the dog or doing your laundry, whatever you're doing, especially if it's sort of angled towards some kind of self-care, then it's actually really valuable to be cultivating that kind of state. We didn't get as far as to distinguish between the meditation and the contemplation while doing one of these activities, but maybe someone else has something to do with that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Anybody else want to piggyback on that? John?
Oh, maybe he was saying bye.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he said till next time. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I guess one relation I've had with it, and I sometimes like thinking about things with like, you know, like really like the layman and the master. Like, I don't know. Sometimes I like to think about both, but like one big thing is it's just a fucking break from the contemplation. I don't know. I guess I think of, you know, even like the thoughts racing in my head as like a version of, you know, light contemplation, but that like can go on unchecked for like 24/7. So at points in my life, I've even just been like, it's just, you know, just like, it's nice to know that it's a break. But at points though, when I realize it's a break, it helps to shape that it's not your reality. Because one reason why I think people should meditate more is I think there's hundreds of thousands of people probably in the United States who don't even realize that they're thinking in words. And like, I don't know, that's just like a take of mine, but like that is shaping their reality. And like meditation at least shows you like, not that there's this like light at the end of the tunnel, but like it's possible not to be like that all the time, you know, and that's a good, makes it the relationship with the contemplation healthier, I guess.
Yeah, really like that. Yeah, that's why I wanted to kind of keep it on the same continuum as you said, like your mind is racing, but as you said at the end, knowing that you can control that better makes it more effective when you decide to actually pursue one of the threads in your head. Yeah, excellent.
Can I just double click on the on how you said like controlling the thoughts in your head? That was an idea that I started off with, and I think like having that idea that you know, the practice of meditation is practicing controlling your own mind. I decided after a while that had actually been quite an unhelpful framework that I'd been working in, because I wasn't very successful at controlling my own mind. And
just to clarify, when I said control, I was talking about the contemplation side, but I don't know if it makes it as meaningful distinction or not. But anyway.
Yeah, I feel like it's still relevant. Like I guess it's a slightly different idea that I had, which was that, you know, by practicing meditation, I'm practicing, you know, forcing my thoughts to all shut up for a little while so I can meditate, you know. But it's the same idea if you're contemplating versus meditating, whether there's thoughts in there. That's the distinction we're kind of playing with at the moment. But the idea I came to is that you can practice, recognizing your thoughts or understanding your thoughts or seeing your thoughts, all of those things, which is not the same dynamic as controlling them or suppressing them or forcing them to do this or that. And I found that if I start with that different angle on, what I'm doing with my thoughts when trying to meditate, it became a much more positive process, the whole thing. And I found, I don't want to say like successful, but I found I was much more successful at it with that basis and that framework in there.
No, yeah, I guess the idea of control is consonant with the having mode that we talked about in the beginning, the having mode rather than the being mode. So the being mode is kind of, yeah. So thank you for bringing that back to everyone's attention. We're kind of over time, but I want to hear if anyone else has thoughts. There's so much stuff in the chat going off. Anyone else before we close up?
One of the things that that came up during chatting about the questions is that you get different forms of meditation or different approaches to meditation, different frameworks of meditation, and perhaps that might be generally more well understood because there's language for that, there's books on that. But contemplation, for at least me personally, I'm not sure how to think about it in different ways and different styles and different approaches. And that's, I guess, simply because I've never thought about the idea even that there might be different ways of contemplating, right? Whereas different forms of meditating, I guess, came up because of exactly what Megan was explaining there. Based on a person's experience, different ways of approaching meditation can work, and also, I guess, depending on the person, for different purposes. So that's something interesting to explore. So if we discuss ideas of meditation and contemplation, it would be kind of more from speaking from a preference, right? As a person, like how I understand meditation because of my preferred way of meditating, and the same with contemplation. So there might be a whole domain to discuss in contemplation with different facets and approaches, and the same with meditation, and that would put a complete different angle on the whole conversation. And another thing is, I think it's clear from your presentation that there's this idea of some kind of, maybe, I don't know, a passive state meditating and more active state contemplating, or at least from what everybody was sharing. It was this idea of you're actively doing something when you're contemplating, and it's kind of you like trying to let go when you're meditating, that idea. But another thing that I noticed when we were discussing this is that it's like my brain doesn't just switch between an active or passive mode, but also between an output and input mode. Like when contemplating, it's almost like you're creating an understanding of something, right? You're building something in your mind, centered and focused around a topic. So you're generating something. Whereas if you're meditating, it feels almost like you're opening, it's a place you can open yourself up to, almost like ideas coming to you in a sense. So it would kind of be more like how, dreaming would work, like daydreaming, like, you kind of drift off maybe. And I'm not, meditation is broad. Okay. This is maybe just one experience of it. Whereas contemplation is the idea of focus, not broad, but maybe depth. So those are some interesting things came up.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, what you're talking about there really brought up a lot for me. I think, for the contemplation part was really intriguing. And I think, I see a couple of ways of then thinking about contemplation, from what Michael Osgood was saying was sort of, just like how it's just thinking. And then Manus, what you were saying, and then relating it to like how I would personally describe contemplation distinct from thinking, and how, like, for me, I would for me, I like to think of contemplation as like when I read maybe like a wisdom book or something, and there's just like a little sentence in there where it's just like, there's like a feeling, it's like a feeling intuitive sense where I'm trying to like, so it's a bit thinking, but it's also kind of like what
It's like a savoring. It's like you're
Yeah.
savoring something.
Yeah. That's,
No, yeah, that's excellent.
what
Yeah.
I see as contemplation for me.
I want to add that whenever I totally get that, and whenever it happens, I feel like that's the only thing I remember of like the whole book or the chapter. Like, is that like moment?
No, yeah, that's exactly. It's very difficult concept to grasp. It's not exactly like thinking, but it's reaching out for meaning, like being receptive to meaning, or like searching for meaning. Yeah. I just want to say one thing. Like we have to wrap up, but I want to say that Daniel, he runs the Metagame Mastermind, and he invited me to kind of run a session and try to kind of like source you guys for ideas on how to live a better life, a bigger life. And because it's a mastermind thing, I think he would be really happy if one of you guys, maybe, I know you guys are really wise and really smart. I talk to you guys all the time, so I know. So if you guys wanted to present something or had an idea, I think he'd be really happy if you pitched it to him, and he would give you that space, and you guys can have the same type of experience that I've had over the past few weeks. So yeah, that's just open invitation from him, because I spoke to him about this before. So yeah, keep that in the back of your mind if you want to test some things out, learn from other people in a more directed way. So yeah, that's all I have time for, but feel free to stick around, and hope to see you guys next week as well.
Yeah, thanks for co-hosting this or doing it. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now I'm going to be alone here. Okay.
Were you guys hanging? I heard him say hang if you want, so I didn't know if that meant the room would just stay.
I guess it did.
But I don't want to stay alone, so that would be weird.
I'm keen to hang.
I can do a little.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to work out. Yeah, I think you gave the host to Manu.
And of
So,
course, it's what time for you, Andre? You know, I always like to ask that.
9 a.m.
Okay. Oh, that's not too bad. I was thinking it was like 7.
No, it's because I had to spend all night doing and finishing off an assignment.